What spirituality does is it keeps you centered. It keeps you contemplative. It keeps you aware of this kind of larger picture, how you can best fit your piece in the puzzle, how you can use your gift to really benefit, step forward in a harmonious way. Because it's the torrents are so furious right now, on all these sides, and governmental and political and cultural and racial, coming from this place of calm, despite the chaos, it can be very powerful.
If you wanted to learn more about philosophy and spirituality, but felt intimidated by ancient Greek or Sanskrit, is it too embarrassing to admit that we are more than the body? Are you afraid to bring up reincarnation over coffee? Well, we love coffee, and Plato, Buddhism, and Sri Ramana Maharshi. And we think these teachers and systems have some use today. This is the Beware How Show. Mystic philosophy made practical. I'm Bob, speaking weekly with Scott and Ryan. We're three conscious creatives and formerly closeted mystics trying to unpack the inaccessible. According to the mystics, the truth cannot be spoken, but we'll try to talk about it anyway.
Hello, I'm Bob, and this is the Beware How Show. Beware How Show. Today is Sunday, June 7th, and we'll be discussing spirituality in social action and allyship. Today might be a little unconventional. I feel like I keep saying that, but we'll share our personal stories and anecdotes and realizations at the beginning. The kind of conceptual stuff is based on a piece I wrote this week called How Spirituality Helps Allyship, and going through particularly listening, amplification, and ultimately conscious evolution, kind of how all those ideas tie into the current, racial and cultural climate in America right now. I think it's important to get across kind of, again, we said this in episode 1, but particularly for a social action racial climate episode, we did try to get a few different people of color for this episode to join the 3 white men of us. And they're busy. They're also exhausted. And a huge component of allyship is self-education and speaking to your people about these kinds of issues. So we're aware of that. I did lock in Sarah Bawani, who's a Muslim poet, for the first weekend of July. So she might actually end up being our first guest, which I'm really excited about. But for today, it's Bob, Scott, and Ryan. And yeah, it'll be cool. I think I'll also add the disclaimer that my How Spirituality Helps Allyship piece, I reached out to about a dozen different activists, Black and non-white, as well. A couple Arabs, a couple Hispanic activists read it and kind of gave me thoughts, and it was really nice. I really got some great feedback from kind of the spectrum of communities of color before publishing, so anyway, we'll be going through that, and you guys both read it and y'all liked it, so thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, glad you wrote it. It's the important time for these thoughts to be put well onto paper and shared around, and especially for white people like us that need some education, obviously, and to be educating ourselves and each other. So keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, man. And I know you've been going to the protests, so I'd like you to share some of that also.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was just a few days ago, joined here in Chicago. They had a really massive protest. I think this one, I mean, there's a lot going on. There's like someone's making like a master list of on Google Docs of just all the ones happening, big and small. But the one we went to on Friday was really big. And it was actually, it was organized by, I just learned, like, someone who's like 25 years old who had never organized anything before, and was able to like pull off this like many thousand march that went down the streets, and it was totally peaceful. Yeah, it was very powerful to see. It felt good to be in the middle of a lot of like-minded individuals of all, colors and races. And it just, especially after the last few weeks of feeling so, just feeling so much despair, like it felt great to be around, to get to see up close all the people who are also fighting for an entirely new system. I mean, specifically what that march was for was the signs were out for defund the police. It was organized by Democratic Socialists in the Chicago chapter. But obviously a lot of groups were there for kind of collectively. But that was the main message of that march. And obviously a lot of cops were out there kind of trailing us and following us, but it just felt good to be able to be there in support of that message, and to see the like faces and of a lot of people that you can tell have lived through a lot, and we're happy to see so many people out there in support of them after having gone through what I can only imagine is an incredible amount of pain. So yeah, it was just the beginning though, and we
Well
want
said.
to keep doing. That was just the warm up in my mind. So like, this needs to turn into
Yeah,
a regular
solidarity.
thing. Yeah,
Solidarity is so important. I think I want to kind of go through my points in this article, but I think there's a kind of a conversation among allies right now about like, what to do. I mean, I think part of this article is like helping white folks kind of understand what to do, because there's just a lot of information being thrown at us, especially if you're new to kind of activism and participating in these kinds of things. But there's this term that I keep seeing called virtue signaling, which I think is probably the least worst thing that white folks can do right now. Like because what it is it's focused on like phony association with this stuff, or like just posting about it. And there's a black activist named Ayanna Lage who published a very informative video about why allies should get over the fear of being perceived as virtue signaling, and she has two main reasons why. And so in the spirit of amplifying black voices, I'll let her explain them herself.
I'm going to donate, I'm going to march, I'm going to support, but why do I have to share it publicly on social media? Isn't that just virtue signaling? Isn't that just me just like trying to, show my friends that I'm woke? What's the point of this performative sharing, which I totally get the sentiment of, but I just want to share with you two quick things that happen when you share your stance publicly. And I know that it might feel counterintuitive if you are someone who prefers to operate behind the scenes and prefers to, not put things out there, but I feel like it's really important. So the first thing that happens is that you signal to people who look like me that you are on our side, and that you are someone that and as painful as this, I can't even say this week because it's way deeper than that, but as painful as this time has been, it has been so heartening to see so many people showing support. The second thing I'm going to mention is actually, I think, the way more important thing, and it is that when you publicly say this country was built on systemic racism, Black Lives Matter, I understand why Black people are angry. You will get your white friends and your white relatives and your white acquaintances who you attended middle school with responding to your posts, and they will be angry and they will be confused, and they will say things like, so you support looters? So you think my life doesn't matter? So you think that because I'm white, I've had an easy time? And you get to educate them instead of people like me having to do the work, which is a huge relief. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that if you are kind of still torn about like, well, why do I have to share this publicly? It's because it will allow you to have hard conversations with the people in your life who are really not quite sure about Black Lives Matter, who don't think white privilege is a thing, who are very, very opposed to this movement. One is expecting you to devote your entire life to this movement and quit your job and give away all your belongings and just become like this racial warrior. Although if you want to, more power to you. It really is simple. And I think that the small steps that we take, that might make us uncomfortable are really what make the big.
I really appreciated hearing Ayana's video, and we did get her personal consent to republish it, by the way, because, yeah, she really affirmed and emboldened the positives of standing in solidarity. So really, I want to emphasize, when you post about it as a white person, your inbox might get some questions. And you guys must know that my Gmail is lit right now. I am messaging people. I am, kind of the ally perspective also is like, there's always more that we could be doing. And that's key. But, I'm trying to have these kinds of conversations with people who are saying, hey, like, question about this. And so what that does is it also takes some of the educating off of Black people and off of communities of color who are, really emotionally exhausted from this whole process.
Yeah.
So that really kind of empowered me. I think people that, especially white folks that might have been on the fence about saying, well, should I do the square or should I do the, share the facts or whatever? And what most Black activists saying, and also Black people are not a monolith. There's not one, cohesive, there's a spectrum of thoughts about this. But what seems to be a large trend is participating in this stuff as far as social media goes, is ultimately positive. And should be the first steps of joining a more active component to all this.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally see the argument of feeling like how just a post isn't enough, because I mean that just posting has been the answer for a lot of white people for a long time. And so I can totally see the argument of why it's not enough. But everyone is at their own stage in this thing, and I think it's important to try and make light of that. But also, if there are some people that we can only get a post out of them, then that's totally fine, because I think that's a step in the right direction. I personally have been feeling like a big shift in me, in that just posting about it is not enough. And I'm feeling a lot of energy into being, not just not racist, but actively anti-racist, and how to take action in that. And that's been a really beautiful process of kind of looking at myself and where I can, make steps and progress in that. And it's also brought up a lot of shame and guilt, and where I haven't done that in the past. And so it's been emotionally very very intense, but very healing process at the same time.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. It's an important realization to have. What I would say to you, from white man to white man, is drop the guilt, pick up the megaphone.
Absolutely.
Because that is useful to understand that, become self-aware about that. But then you can move past it and you can start to really get involved.
Yep.
Yeah, I heard someone say it as like white guilt, when heated up to the right temperature, can be turned into action or something like that. It's like you can convert that energy into something. Because I feel it too. I've absolutely. It's so easy when you're naturally given a pass on all the like prejudice that people face, it's easy to get lulled into a sense of comfort because you are in the we get to be comfortable because that's like what we have inherited as part of this racist structure that we all grew up in. And so that's we've all done it. We've all been lulled into that, forgetfulness or that complacency. And especially as, three dudes that grew up in Texas and, but I mean, it's everywhere in the country, but yeah, it's fair to say we know quite a few people in our, extended family and friends that, could very much be hearing these perspectives and that don't agree with us. I have people in my family that, many of which I haven't talked to in years, but that's part of it. That's like what I need to do is, open up dialogue with the people in like Southeast Texas that I am related to that are not friendly to this cause and need to be made aware of why they are so incredibly wrong on these issues. But yeah, it's going to take a lot of work, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think you guys are both exactly right. I mean, I think this the tangible momentum definitely does feel like it will continue on. And Sarah, actually, speaking of, my Muslim poet friend, said, she took a picture from a protest in Dallas, and she's like, everybody keeps talking about the new normal. What if this is the new normal of just like sustained, like you just go to the protest on the weekend, like that's very interesting. And it's almost interesting too, how like, it feels like the quarantine, in addition to the latest string of police brutalities, kind of amplified this, this force. But what I wanted to read was, there's a great book by Ram Dass, and we'll have a list of reading materials. I listed a few on my Medium article, but he has a great book called How Can I Help? And it's just reflections on service. And he said, sometimes these feelings get us going. Speaking of guilt to being turned into action. Just the kick in the pants we may need, and we can keep them in check. In fact, work with them. We can turn anger at injustice into cool, steady resolve. We can flip fear of war into greater reverence for life. We can find in feelings of guilt a greater call to moral sensitivity and alertness. Yet left to themselves, fear, anger, and guilt are unwholesome states of mind. How many of us have them fully in control in our private lives? They pull us into a cycle of reactivity and feed on themselves. We begin to lose sight of the conditions that might have provoked them in the first place. In addition, they tend to be addictive and toxic. History is filled with examples of how these attitudes, which initially may have stirred people to action, went on to poison and destroy well-intentioned movements for social change. These are powerful states of mind we're playing with. So that's Ram Dass's warning.
Nice.
He says, moreover, these states of mind blur our judgment and blind us to tactics that might be more reliable sources of action. Caught up in these emotions, we lose our timing and make mistakes. Our hearts grow cold. We turn people off. We're too worked up to hear our own inner voice, let alone trust anyone else's. What's the benefit in that? They also prevent us from calling upon deeper human virtues that often move us all to act. In anger, we may lose sight of love. In fear, we may sacrifice trust and courage. In guilt, we may deny self-worth and obstruct inspiration. Do we really want to lose access to all of these? If we really care about social change, can we afford to sacrifice such sources of commitment and strength? Are we serious or not? So,
nice.
That's the counter, or not the counter necessarily, but I think a worthy warning to, the rage and the anger in the moment here. And again, I mean, I think just a disclaimer, like, I'm really speaking to white folks. I've read enough and I've learned enough and educated myself enough to know that, like, it's not my place to be telling Black folks and communities of color how to be reacting to this. And so on my Medium piece, there's a big disclaimer up at the top where I link to, Danny sent us the a collection of tweets of white men responding to Martin Luther King III, who tweeted the famous quote, "Riots are the language of the unheard." And white men are responding to Martin Luther King III about that quote. And that's called white-splaining, when you explain race to, to black people in talk about structural injustice from that perspective. And so that's not my intention, but I think for kind of white allies and allies to be, what spirituality does is it keeps you centered. It keeps you contemplative. It keeps you aware of this kind of larger picture, how you can best fit your piece in the puzzle, how you can use your gift to really benefit, step forward in a harmonious way. Because it's the torrents are so furious right now, on all these sides, in governmental and political and cultural and racial, coming from this place of calm, despite the chaos, it can be very powerful.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to circle back onto the shame and guilt thing too. I mean, especially for white people, I think it's important to note that it is totally okay to feel shame and guilt, and it's going to be a part of the process. And I know for me that it took. I mean, the last week has been very emotional for me. I mean, I've been kind of completely consumed with these feelings, and finding myself, crying on and off, just feeling the weight of the pain of the Black community. And it's really been a beautiful process of feeling into a deeper sense of empathy that I don't think I've felt before. And part of that process was, feeling the shame and guilt of me not taking enough action in the past. And so I just want everyone to know that is a part of the process, and it's okay. And it might take you a few days or a week to kind of get through that, but the goal would be to turn that into action, right? Take that energy. It typically, in the grieving process of any sort, what comes after that is anger. And so hopefully you can take some of that energy and turn that into action.
Yeah.
Thanks for adding that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd add to that too. It's when that his Ram Dass's warning about like you said, it's a powerful state of mind, and it has its use. And then I guess the risk is that you can stay in it too long, and then it kind of curdles almost or spoils into something else. But yeah, it has to happen.
Yep.
As for us as white people who are part of the structure, we are implicated, so we have to feel that. And then it kind of reminds me of
it's useful in jumping out of that hypnosis that you talked about earlier, the being lulled into complacency.
Yep.
Yeah,
this can jump you out of it.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
And
I think it's super important to be aware of that.
Right. Yeah. And that state that he was warning of when you were reading it, it sounded to me like some like being on social media too much, and getting consumed by that, and then not taking that any further. And that's how I kind of felt in the last few weeks, just seeing all this stuff and not doing anything about it. Yeah, that turns into fear, shame, guilt. And then when I got out, to a protest, it reminded me of that. I think it was like Cornel West said, he's like, justice is what love looks like in public. And it really felt like this massive, like I felt like I was standing in the middle of a massive like bubble of love, with all these people, because we were united.
It's amazing.
And in response to all that fear and shame and guilt, and it converted it into a really positive feeling. And I was like, I needed it. It was how to get out of that trap, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, you transmuted the energy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to do that.
I think
it's not just protest, but there's a lot of ways to convert.
Yeah, what I would say is, everyone has a role. there's a nice kind of meme floating around saying like, the protest is great if that works for you, but also like if you are a debater, then you talk to your family members that are not empathetic. If you're there's an Alan Watts quote too. It's just something like, if you're a painter, paint.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a writer, write. If you're, whatever your gift is, do that. And part of this too, I guess, what's strange about the social and being transparent is like, I am definitely a work in progress, and I have felt the same, aspects of shame and guilt that you guys are referring to, and not doing more and getting complacent kind of again. It's like we're caught in this loop of this. But there's also this weird thing about like ally resume is kind of like weird. Like, I don't want to be like, well, I did this, and this, like that's not, I don't think helpful really. So I'm just personally trying to kind of find exactly what that role is and how best to help. But like, for example, in the Palestinian film, that was a documentary I did about the Palestinian conflict. There's all this Palestinian activism going on that's reflecting American struggle and solidarity. This has unleashed global solidarity. My friends in the Palestinian activist community are posting like George Floyd murals in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
The idea that there are all these struggles that are connected between Black, between Indigenous, between, Palestinian, basically marginalized community against colonial oppressors, it's all the same fight. Mm-hmm. So calling that out, in addition to my own psychological layers of like, how transparent am I about this, I guess is the point to get across.
Yeah, it's been
well, I've done this. That's not useful.
It's been amazing to see the support worldwide. I mean, I think I was hoping for that. I think all of us were hoping for that. But it's been really incredible to see how massive it's been. It's really
super
really
cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, Berlin turned out big time. those pictures were insane from how many people showed up in Berlin.
Amsterdam, basically where like cannabis is used. There's more anger against police.
But yeah, even like Syria too.
Which
like
that's also another good thing. Yeah, the Middle East. The Middle East goes off against colonialism too. I added a thing about policing because this is a huge issue right now is police brutality. I don't know. Do we want to talk about my article, or we can come back to it maybe, because we're kind of just following the organic conversation here, which I'm enjoying.
Yeah, if there's bits and pieces that you want to talk about specifically.
Yeah, dive in.
Okay, cool. Let's touch on policing because that's extremely important, and I think if you have eyeballs, I mean, even members of my family whom I've talked to have said nobody thinks that George Floyd should have been killed. I mean, very, very, very racist people think that was fine, or don't care. But even people that aren't, or that are against the protests or against the looting, which is the whole nother issue that we can talk about and unpack. But police brutality is, I think, a common enemy of the American people, and it's a bipartisan issue. I think for white people that have hashtag Blue Lives Matter people in your family, and you wondering what the hell to do, a good thing is have conversations with them and show them statistics. I mean, I think to touch on my article, what I talk about is really the first step in all this process is listening to non-white voices, and that's self-education, reading Black and communities of color authors, reading and being exposed to non-white perspectives is the first step. Yeah. And as far as spirituality in there, Buddhism has a mindful listening practice that is very cool and very useful in absorbing the entirety of what a person's really telling you, as kind of a first step. Secondarily, I mean, very, very, very quickly, after you start to realize the nature of the disparity of experience between black and white non-white experiences in America, the second step kind of in my prescription here is amplification of non-white voices and amplification of statistical evidence. And so there's a lot of people in those kind of Blue Lives Matter, groups on Facebook or, whatever, people that I see occasionally that do post about that stuff. They like to talk about stats and facts, and Ben Shapiro's kind of catchphrase is facts don't care about your feelings and things like that. Well, the stats are actually on the side of structural injustice. So, I think in that spirit, there's a great book called The End of Policing by this guy, Alex Vitale, he's an academic, and he went through very thoroughly. I mean, just the idea that, for example, mainstream reform initiatives that Minneapolis tried, they were the benefactor of an Obama era police reform that Eric Holder called groundbreaking, the former attorney general in Minneapolis, the same city where Derek Chauvin publicly lynched George Floyd. They were doing mindfulness, which I was kind of on the mindful cop camp there for a while, and that doesn't fix it. What I'm learning, and I think my biggest awareness is I've been kind of in the reform the police camp for a while now, and what the end of policing discusses is that two things have happened. One, there's been a massive expansion of what the scope of policing is in the last 40 years. It used to just be like Andy Griffith and like Barney, like cop, like in the little small town city where they like, so howdy, ma'am, and like now it's like they deal with schools, they deal with homelessness, they deal with youth violence, they deal with all these things that in the past, before the last 40 years, that wasn't a part of their role. And so now, not only are they traumatized by having to deal with all these emergency situations that they don't get adequate counseling for, what a police person actually does is way beyond what it needs to be doing. And secondarily, what Alex says, the author here, is policing has become more intensive. It's become more invasive and more aggressive. It's become militarized. And so a combination of expansion of scope and militarization is what creates this current environment. And so I think, for me personally, as far as kind of stepping back to like finding your role in this, white allies and allies to be, find an aspect here, either that we're discussing or that you're seeing in articles right now, and go with that one, whichever one calls to you, focus on that. I really think that me personally, I could, see myself getting involved in, education around structural problems with policing right now in America.
Yeah, Chicago went through the same issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just gonna say, my childhood best friend is a police officer, and he's a Michigan State police officer in Michigan, and I know he's probably got a lot on his plate right now, and I'm hoping to get on the phone with him soon. I've been texting with him a little bit, but he's mentioned before his experience coming into the police academy and just the hierarchy and seeing that there's corrupt cops and just not being able to speak up about it because he will be handed kind of pretty much all the shitty jobs and will just be it'll cause a very difficult career path for him. And so there's been a lot of hesitation and I've seen a lot of frustration from him, not knowing how to handle that. I haven't talked to him about any of this since all of this has come up, but I'm hoping to get him on the phone, and I'm super curious to hear what his life has been like and what his perspective is. And he's a very sweet and loving guy, so I'm really curious to just hear his thoughts. But yeah, I mean, I wrote a little bit too, and that I had posted, and
Yeah, I liked what you said too. By the way,
thank you.
That was great.
Yeah, it's just like the police system is one of those systems that you just can't have bad apples in. It just it like breaks. The system breaks if that is the case. I saw this
Right.
this like quote. I think it was from Chris Rock, and I'm probably gonna slaughter it, but
I saw it.
yeah, he said like something along the lines of like, a police force is not a place you can have bad apples. It's like pilots in an airplane. It's like that you can't have bad apples
Right.
flying planes. And that's exactly how the police force should be too. Like it is simply not a place you can have bad apples. And yeah, it feels like there needs to be some sort of kind of whistleblower protection to start to be able to confront corruption and start to weed out bad cops. It feels like
Totally.
all the mindfulness
Accountability.
training and all the de-escalation tactics,
Yeah.
you can do all of that. But if a cop is racist, like that's not gonna fix it. There needs to be programs in place for good cops to have protection to be able to start to weed out bad cops. And
Yeah, one aspect of all this that I've become aware of to the accountability point is that typically it's the state prosecutors and district attorneys that are the ones that are supposed to go after bad cops, and they have a symbiotic relationship with the police department and the sheriffs to where they need access to certain cases, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And so why would they throw the PD under the bus, for, they're going to let the guy off because they have a political, situation where needs to remain advantageous for them.
right.
So stripping away those kinds of, mutually beneficial relationships is extremely important, because that will continue to, keep police departments transparent and accountable when there are these just disgusting displays of brutality that now we're seeing taking place against the protesters. I think that's another piece here is I think it was like an Onion article that was like police departments use brutality against police brutality protests. It's like they're caught in this loop of kind of army men bullshit.
Yeah.
And they're going to get off because they don't have this current system of true accountability.
Yeah. Yeah, people are definitely fed up with the power they're able to wield. I was talking about this with my wife yesterday, and how it's kind of amazing that how much power is given to someone who's able to, like go through your neighborhood and use force against anyone who scares them, or it could be anything. It's just that, like, that level of power, and these aren't elected people. It's like that's more power than a president would arguably have in your day-to-day life at any given point, and yet they're not elected, they're just chosen. And so it's like people are starting to realize there needs to be a whole new system. I mean, Chicago went through this years ago because we had like a federal injunction or whatever. Federal stepped in to deal with, because we had the Laquan McDonald shooting in Chicago years ago. There was, and it got covered up. It got, the fellow policeman kind of, pushed it under the rug, as is often the case. And so we had all these, like that whole, the 8 can't wait, those 8 things that we've already done that in Chicago. That didn't solve it. It also just ended up giving them, more funding. Again, like reform ends up just being more money for the police, which usually comes out of the city's budget
Yeah.
from somewhere else, takes, like just the ratios of funding and priority. It's just there's so much power, like political power and like money power. It's just like that whole structure. It needs, it just has to change in like really, really fundamental ways.
This is a great segue into this Alex Vital quote. He says, well, I think that one of the myths we have about policing is that it is politically neutral and that it is always here to sort of create order in a way that benefits everyone. But the reality is that America's social order has never been entirely equitable. We have a long history of exploitation of the indigenous population of African Americans through slavery, Jim Crow, and today. And while we're not using the police to manage slavery or colonialism today, we are using police to manage the problems that our very unequal system has produced. We're invested in this kind of austerity politics that says the government can't afford to really do anything to lift people up. So we've put all our resources into subsidizing the already most successful parts of the economy. Those parts of the economy are producing this huge group of people who are homeless, unemployed, have untreated mental health and substance abuse problems. And then we ask the police to put a lid on those problems, to manage them so they don't interfere with the order that we're supposedly all benefiting from. So if you're one of those poor people, one of those folks with a mental health problem, someone who's involved in black market activities to survive, then you experience this constant criminalization. Systemic.
Yeah.
This shit is thorough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I'm getting anger as coming up.
Yeah.
Just going through this. Kind of touching back on the spirituality piece. It's like, this stuff will just burn you to the ground. And one thing I have to bring up, and I just want to make sure that we talk about this because you're talking about spirituality and social action, and Scott sent me a video of another black artist and activist who said a similar point, which I was thrilled that, she kind of made a agreement, larger point than I was making, which is, frankly, like spirituality is very clear, as we've discussed on this show, as you'll get in our emails, and just more output from us in the future, is that, spirituality says not only are we all one family, but as we discussed in the non-dual episode, Buddhism and Vedic philosophy take it a step further. We're ultimately all one, capital O, one. Each cell makes up the body. Each drop makes up the ocean. We're merely separate masks of the same being. So let's work toward having that recognition. But before we can acknowledge this inherent unity, we have to first recognize the differences. As we become more aware of the disparities and we listen to the unheard, then it becomes a dharmic responsibility to, share this information with other masks of ourself in a loving way. You can't just go straight to unity if on this level of form there's disparity. That's disharmonious. So I just wanted to call that out, that like, yes, spirituality is about oneness and unity, and that's beautiful. And I will, forever be megaphoning that, but I refuse to do that in a way that is negligent of the suffering of the persecuted. It's just, it doesn't work unless it's acknowledged. And, I think what I was going to say earlier too is to Scott's point about police having all this control in neighborhoods and stuff like this. I was talking to an Afro-Latina colleague earlier this week. She said, I've never had a positive experience with a cop. Zero. Every time it's been antagonistic. Every single time.
Yep.
I'm nervous. I'm freaking out. And they're not consoling. They're, coming at her from a place of, steps away from a problem.
Yeah.
Just right there, which is something that white folks we just don't live with that.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. My brother-in-law is black, and this has been I've been kind of close with him this week in conversation. He's sharing a lot of stuff that he's seeing, and just kind of reinforcing a lot of the stuff that he's been telling us for a long time, ever since we've known him. I mean, he his whole life has had nothing but bad experiences with cops.
Yeah.
He is married to my sister, who is a white woman, and there have been multiple times where they've been pulled over, and he starts getting questioning as if he kidnapped her, and it's
Yeah,
just
Jesus.
and both of them obviously are completely shocked in a moment like that, and it's it's absolutely terrible.
Yeah, no, we're married.
No, yeah, for real. It's absolutely terrible, and and this is a part of the shame and guilt
Yeah.
too that I was referring to, because me as a white man, I have never experienced that, and I generally have had pretty fine interactions with cops. I can't recall many instances where I was faced with an aggressive cop or someone that was antagonistic. Most of it has been generally fine and sometimes pleasant, like friendly, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's a part of that shame and guilt too, just like recognizing that my experience is very different, and I really need to take that into consideration. Like I really need to take a hard, deep look at that, you know, because that is not the case for all of our brothers and sisters and people of color. It is just simply not the case. And it's as a white person, it's a moment to kind of, you know, just that's a moment to realize, and it's really important.
And sitting with that, like you said.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
That's great work that you're doing, brother.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. To add to your point, Bob, about the addressing specifically like the white spiritual audience, which, you know, that's who we are in that demographic. So I'm also just talking to us. It's like that inclination, and I'm guilty of it because I tend toward, I'm kind of a hermit by nature, and I tend towards everything's an illusion. I'm going to detach. I'm going to try to, you know, transcend the chaos, blah, blah, blah. But if you're supposedly talking about oneness and spirituality, but like the basic needs of justice are not being met in the street, it's just a mockery of love, the love that you're supposedly because if that, like that Cornel West quote, if like that public form of love, which is justice, if that's not there, then you're missing the whole point, and your oneness and spirituality doesn't mean anything if it's not being shared in a just way with everyone. So yeah, it's like that's I have to come to terms with that in a big way, as do a lot of spiritual white people, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a quote surfacing, which is the Reverend Desmond Tutu, who's one of the grandfathers of planet Earth, and he said silence is choosing the side of the oppressor, right? And so, you know, I think on one end, for confused whites, of which there are many, including aspects of ourselves, you know, this spectrum. I made an illustration in the Medium piece, which is on one side you kind of have this silence is choosing the side of the oppressor, do more than post, and then on the other side you have like don't be white savior and don't white splain, you know. So to someone who's less, you know, not that I'm completely evolved here, but someone who's less contemplative about this nature of these things, it can be difficult to understand and to navigate when to be silent, when to be active, what to do. And so, you know, kind of my conclusive point in this article is listening to non-white perspectives and amplifying non-white voices are kind of the balance in between. And what, you know, spirituality does is meditating, you know, having a regular meditation practice expands our awareness and sense of the subtler qualities of the present moment. Community work, feeding the less fortunate, brings us face to face with difficult socioeconomic issues. It increases our perspective and empathy for those of different cultural backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds. So these kinds of spiritual practices can help us determine and distinguish how best to contribute and how best to, work towards a more liberated community. Because it can be challenging to understand that, and staying looped in on everyone's Instagram stories right now is not going to be as useful as, like Ryan's doing, sitting with it, like Scott's doing, marching. I mean, I think hats off to you guys for a week of reflection and really sitting and facing with the current state of the country.
I was gonna say, I think it brings up something that I'm kind of realizing in this moment is a big part of this process for a lot of people. It has been for me, and I'm sure it is for a lot of other white people, is ownership. It's just pure ownership. Being willing to face wherever you are kind of in this process of opening yourself up to being angry about this and supporting our communities and people of color. There's a lot of ownership that you're gonna have to go through, and it's gonna be painful. And I think that is a super super important part of it. It's not something you can skip over. It's that is where the empathy starts to come from, is when you really start to look inside about your own internal situation and kind of where you're at. And the more that you can kind of own those feelings, it will start to break down the ego and start to break down any walls or barriers that you have up or resistance against this. And I think it's a process that a lot of white people are probably going through, and I think it's really important to just focus on ownership as much as possible and listening. It's just owning you, where you are, and listening
where you're at. Yeah, man.
Agreed.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of love that comes from that. There's a lot of self-love too, which is, I think, just as important. That's been a process for me too, is like, because with the shame and guilt, there's a lack of self-love in that, and so that's been a process too, is just learning to love myself through those faults, because I ultimately, it's hard to love anyone if you're not loving yourself. So if you're caught in this cycle of like beating yourself up, it's not helping anything. So part of that process is learning to love yourself through that. And I think the ownership aspect really, the more you can kind of sit into that and crack that open, the more love you'll have for yourself, and the more love that you'll have for everyone around you. And that is where kind of that empathy comes from. And hopefully all of this can be transmuted into just energy, pure energy, ideally anger, because the Black community is angry, rightfully so. I'm feeling a lot of that anger too, and I feel like I'm feeling it on a deeper level than I have before. And it's a really good feeling. It's really, it feels really good to be feeling this on a kind of a deeper level. A lot more pain. There's a lot more pain in it. And it is being, for me, being turned into anger. And I also, to follow up on something that Scott said earlier, my tendency in the past, absolutely, as my spiritual practice being the forefront of my life, and for many years I always felt that anger was never the answer, just kind of not related to this, but in my own life. Like I had a really hard time getting comfortable with anger. I didn't like it at all. It has to do with some just kind of childhood trauma, but anger just never seemed like the right answer. And the more I could focus on peacefulness, the better I felt.
I've never seen you angry in 9 years of knowing you, so that's 100%
I'm kind of the same way. Yep.
And over the last year and a half, I've done a lot of work working with Jennifer Miller specifically about owning my anger, because she has shown me that anger is really powerful and really important. Sometimes it needs to be used because it's the only thing that will change something. And so I have really flipped my perspective on anger and how important it is. And so I hear you, Scott. Like my tendency too
Catalyst.
is to be the just peaceful and just kind of go within, but it's that is not the answer for the Black community. They can't do that, you know, like, and I can't do that either. It's not okay. And so that's been a realization for me too, is like, and I feel a big shift, and it feels really good. It's been good.
Yeah, it feels tangible.
Yeah,
it really feels tangible right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the momentum is super cool to see. And you know, yeah, I've been talking to several Black friends too, and you know, I shared the fact that, for example, on my feed recently, this old chef friend of mine posted a picture of him wearing a Colin Kaepernick jersey, and his post was like, "This has been in the closet for too long, literally and figuratively, and I should have been more supportive." And you know, I've always thought that it was cool what this guy did, and I haven't worn this in 4 years or something. And it was an admission kind of thing of like, I fucked up, and now, but I realized, and so I messaged him. I commented, I was like, "This is awesome." I messaged him. I was like, "Hell yes." Like, you know, he was like, I'm a bit ashamed that I haven't, you know, because I just love Black people and I have my friends, but I just don't really act, you know, kind of this collective realization that a lot of progressive whites are having. And you know, I just was like, that's so cool. And that guy's feed is probably different than mine, in that, you know, his feed, I don't think, is as echo chambery in support of the protest as mine is. And so he might have even a greater impact on less empathetic people.
Totally.
Yeah.
That would stop scrolling and go, "Whoa, Ben's wearing a Kaepernick jersey," you know? And so anyway, I messaged that to a Black friend of mine, and I was like, I'm seeing things like this, which is kind of making me optimistic, and not to be comfortably optimistic, you know, but he was like, that's so cool. I love seeing that. And, you know, I was like, we let it get out of our hands again last time. And it feels the loudest momentum I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
And he was like, we really need, you know, my friend was like, we need it. We need you guys.
Yeah.
So,
that's I think sooner. That's the most. Yeah, one of the
just 400 years of subjugation.
Yeah, right.
It's really important that white people are the megaphone right now, and standing up. It's like, that is, the Black community has been doing this forever, and they can't do it on their own. Nothing's going to change until the white community joins them. It's kind of plain and simple, you know? It is amazing to see situations like that. It's people opening up, and it might be baby steps for some, but it's kind of, you know, I don't take what you can get, you know, like everyone is going to be moving at their own pace, and ideally we can be pushing people to be, you know, moving, really shifting. And I do feel a really big shift happening right now, and so I mean, that's a win in my book, you know, having someone like him put on that jersey, and especially if his community is not normally like that, you know.
I think that's my role too, and is like applauding formerly hesitant whites.
Absolutely.
You know, like I can do that. Like I can encourage, you know, people that are on the fence. And you know, even another friend of mine posted something like, you know, almost like I've seen a couple of like aware people that are like posting disclaimers of like, hesitant to virtue signal, but like, I'm with y'all. And like, it's just like, look, it's not virtue signaling if you're sincere,
right?
If you're active. I'm not concerned about being perceived as a virtue signaler, because I'm working. I'm a work in progress. I'm not finished, but I do things in my community, and I work on education projects. And, you know, if someone thinks I'm a virtue signaler, that's fine. They can be wrong. I'm still going to do the work, and I'm still showing solidarity. So, you know, that's kind of what I said to this friend of mine, was like, don't let this kind of egoistic anxiety about how you're going to be perceived prevent you from showing solidarity with the Black community who's exhausted, or become, to this activist point earlier, become an inbox for questions, for white questions, of which there are many.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a good, I think it's that fear of virtual signaling is just another manifestation of this guilt we're feeling. And it's the guilt of having not done more sooner. And I feel that, as I should. And so, that's like, cause what a luxury we have to get to choose when to be angry and do something about it, and look what it took for us to notice it. Like how many people had to die and be brutalized for us to come to, that's a luxury we have as white people. And so like the people who don't have that luxury, they should call us out for not doing more sooner, because it's true. And we should own that. Like Ryan said, we have to own that. But then don't stay there, work through that, move through it, and become active and mobilize in response.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I tell you what though, the unity thing is a big motivator. I know it's like controversial to say in activist communities, or like kind of some of the stuff from earlier in the conversation about how anger is good, but it can burn you up. And like, I have some, kind of anti-imperialist friends that I'm too flowery for them, and then I feel like my spiritual friends, I'm too fiery,
Sounds like you're right on track.
I have no home. Well, I agree with you, because I do have self-love, but
it's the middle path.
But yeah, I mean, I think for me, like the reason that I have been doing soup kitchen work for, a long time is because of the unity. It's not because of the anger at the hunger.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not angry about the hunger. That's not why I'm going to the soup kitchen. I go to the soup kitchen because the joy that I feel of connecting with the working poor of the city, it charges me up more than anything. And granted, I haven't gone this year because of COVID, but I was going about twice a month the last few years.
Yeah.
And seeing people, smiles, and hearing them, and, underneath all the anger, we have to keep the love and the unity.
Yeah.
The anger and the shame and that process is so important and beautiful, but don't let that take over. Like it still has to be motivated underneath from
that's
oneness.
a really great point. The anger comes from a place of love and connection. That is where it's coming from. It's coming from a place of wanting to bring people together. It's not I think it's really important to note that it's not a place of, it's not, the goal is not division, the goal is not dividing people. The goal is to bring people together. So it's an anger that comes from pure love,
Totally. Yeah. Like if you don't have,
and I got to add this disclaimer on towards the end here. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if you don't have love for those communities, then you're probably not angry right now, which is, and if you do more work, like you said, Bob, that I feel the same way. I've been tutoring for the last 3 years, and it's underprivileged kids, usually from Black communities, and I love these kids and getting to interact with them now it's through Zoom, of course, but getting to interact with them weekly, those are the faces I see when I get angry at injustice now, because I know they're the ones that are going to have to live through it. And it's you have to
your love for them is what spurns your involvement.
That's the wellspring of where everything else comes from is love for those people. And so but you wouldn't know that though if you weren't interacting with them. You gotta dive in and interact with these with disenfranchised communities and all around you, and if you do that, you'll start feeling some very strong feelings of solidarity with them. It's kind of inevitable after that.
Totally. this guy, there's a couple of like really old white dudes at the soup kitchen that I go that like know everybody, and that's like goals as hell. Like they're, you know, like, hey Ronnie, like how you doing? You know, "Hey, oh, you've been clean 100 days. You know, like like these guys know everybody, and because they're the rock for these people, some of them. And anyway, I was talking to one of these guys who's like involved in all of them, and he's like, I just get so much from doing this. You know, it's whatever the appearance of it is, it's for me. And I was like, it's so selfish of us. Was like my joke to him.
Yeah.
You know, volunteering on the weekends or whatever, and it's true. It's very rewarding, and I think, like you said, Scott, it just engenders solidarity.
Yeah.
Disclaimer here on the End of My Spirituality Helps Allyship article, which is spirituality will not magically erase every problem. Okay, angry activists listening. We need to continually root out racism wherever it exists, from racist individuals to racist institutions to racist aspects of ourselves. We need to retrain and demilitarize police departments. Again, Alex Vitale, The End of Policing, check it out. We need more balanced education curriculums. We didn't talk about that at all. Maybe we'll talk about it in the future, but textbooks are also structurally unjust.
Yeah.
We need more non-white legislators. Like, we're getting there as of 2018, but we got a ways to go.
Yeah, long ways to go.
And so, you know, all that said, we have work to do, and we can all contribute in some way. And actually, many of those women of color, for example, the Squad, who are just heroes, many of them have very difficult primaries that the kind of structural, institutional politicians kind of have put their puppets up against them because they've made such a you know, impressive and worthy and exciting debut for progress. The establishment powers that be are you know, I think AOC has like 11 people running against her or something like that. So anyway, all that said, you know, in my view, spirituality is not reserved for a cave in the Himalayas or a bougie yoga studio next to an expensive coffee shop. You know, our inherent unity, that message powerfully applies for the here and now and can help us work towards a more harmonious future. Angela Davis's book, her latest book, is called Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I love that. Yeah, if you guys have any kind of closing thoughts, we're hitting time, but I had to add that disclaimer.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. That was important.
Like,
important last.
Spirituality is important. We still got to do work. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I think I don't have anything else to add myself, but feel free.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great references that you put in that article. There's a lot of good information in there, so would definitely encourage everyone to go check that out. Especially, most specifically, all of our white friends. But yeah, I guess just to add a note onto, because I feel like yeah, there's maybe for me personally, it hasn't been a whole lot of relating the spiritual practice to a lot of this, but I think for me it's just my spiritual practice is where my love comes from, right? It's how I cultivate love for myself and for the people around me, and not only the people physically around me, but everyone. And I do believe that at the core, racism is a spirituality problem, kind of plain and simple. Like if you are if you can't see that other humans, no matter what their color, are the same as you, they want the same things as you, they want to be loved. That's all they want. everyone wants to be loved. And if you can't see that, there's a serious spiritual problem. And so I do think that, spirituality is a massive component to this, specifically in trying to dissolve racism. I think spirituality plays
Yeah, and
the
ignorance.
biggest role.
Ignorance of like lack of empathy. I'm seeing Daryl Davis's stuff getting shared too again, which didn't mention him in the article or him earlier, but he's kind of virally known over the last few years for converting. I think he has like 300 plus KKK robes. He's a black musician, and it's kind of like people. He always comes up in these kinds of situations. It's like, and he's did a great Joe Rogan, I think, like within the last 6 months, because white supremacy on the rise, racial injustice, and things like this. It's like he's a black man that has befriended 300 KKK members. I'm not telling anybody other than hesitant whites what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think the love component is there in Daryl Davis. He met these guys, and also courage. We didn't talk about courage, but maybe we should, which is, the courage to face racists and racism. Just imagine the cojones on this guy for, he would go up to like white dragons and stuff. He would go to like KKK bars in like little tiny podunk towns and be like the only, and he's a big guy, but he's still one black guy.
Yeah.
And, he would have conversations with very, very, very high up Klan members. And, guess what? Typically those guys never met a black person.
Right.
Typically those guys, not a great, not Rhodes Scholars. They're not in a book club. You know what I mean? Like they have a very limited perspective of the world, and so Daryl kind of came at them with love and education and empathy, and that just blew their minds in half, and they left the Klan. These guys, I mean, go listen to Daryl explain it and talk about it, but it's a combination of all this stuff. It's love, empathy, education. And also courage. I think that's definitely something that we didn't talk about. That is in the article here, the 1,000th plug for my article. But, I've heard colleagues that even have had like, it's called in the workplace microaggressions, which, I think most racism in cities, particularly in like America, I don't know. What do I know? But a lot of urban kind of racism, like rural racism is like, more overt, but microaggressions in like the workplace of like, oh, you don't sound black, or like, we've done a lot of trainings at work, and like people will be like they'll speak over like a black person,
Sure,
or black woman, and not speak over any of the white men, or like there's all those things are real. And so the courage to call out those kinds of situations, I think, again, for allies and allies to be standing up to when you see black people and people of color being berated by racism, or even, victims of microaggression, subtler racism, to call it out, and to call it out from a place of understanding and courage.
Yeah, the chances are in our circles we will have less chance to call out Klan members, and more chance to call out more chance to call out the Amy Cooper type, the supposed progressives, who are still deeply ingrained in like the attitudes and activities of racist people, even though they claim to be progressive. So yeah, calling it all out. And that will take courage, absolutely, and risk.
Yeah,
we have to risk.
Well, it's
ourselves.
Just the comfortableness of complacency, like you were saying. I think we just all have been lulled, regardless of our amount of involvement. I mean, I think everyone is just realizing this. So yeah, it's important. Reflection, sitting with it, action, love. We covered a lot of really good stuff. So thank you guys. I honor your sincerity.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Glad we solved racism.
Ha.
You know, the death episode was pretty funny, but this one had, the tone was, I think, appropriate.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I reined it in because I'm aware that this isn't the punchline episode. That's the death episode. If you want laughs, check out how much we riff on death. This one was more from the heart and more appropriate. So anyway, all right, love you guys. Talk soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah, love y'all.
Beware House Show. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.